of that great, I don't know whether it was not of interest, but I guess there just wasn't money to do that kind of study on a regular basis prior to about 1969 or so, with the passage of the Controlled Substances, the Controlled Substances Act. So it was about that time that most of these national surveys began. Prior to that, we have to go on less reliable statistics. But as we already mentioned, prior to the opioid epidemic ramping up, there was a barbiturate epidemic, and there was also an amphetamine epidemic here in the United States, but it was prescribed amphetamines and methamphetamine for that matter amongst those amphetamines, and that started not too long after the Second World War. I don't have very good statistics on it, so that's why I don't show you all these lovely graphs about it, but that's something to keep in mind when we look at these statistics. So today we're specifically looking at, where is it there, cocaine and methamphetamine, and then this ugly one, which has recently become much more popular, which is prescription stimulant misuse. So you can already see that there's about a 5-to-1 ratio, at least in terms of people trying cocaine versus methamphetamine in the last year, and roughly an 8-to-1 for people trying a prescription stimulant versus methamphetamine. These are the official numbers over here for initiates. This is the unofficial but more accurate estimates. So I would go with this. And so for cocaine, once again, the 80s were the period of most use, at least since 1965. The number of people that have been starting to use crack or methamphetamine has been declining, and also represents a very small 0.1% of the population, very small number. All right. So then looking at lifetime use for stimulants, this is misuse of psychotherapeutics. So this includes pain relievers, tranquilizers, stimulants, prescription stimulants, and the other things that we've been studying. So that's just an overall for prescription misuse. Prescription stimulant misuse is right here. So the number of people that are using cocaine in their lifetime has remained fairly constant up until about 2000, where it increased. And I'm not sure if this increase here is because of a change in how they're doing the study, because that's the one issue with trying to compare these numbers all the way back as far as they go, is that they keep changing how they're doing the study. But since that change, the number has been fairly constant at about 15% of the population. And then for methamphetamine, having ever tried it is between 5 and 6% of the population, and for crack, having tried it, also fairly stable at about 4%, 3 to 4%. And this is looking at having ever tried cocaine in different age groups. So you've got the 12 to 17-year-olds down here, up to about 3% here at 2002 roughly, and back down to around 1% in 2021 amongst the 12 to 17-year-olds. In the 18 to 25-year-old group, that's the ones that seem to use it most. They're the ones with the peak use in the 80s, and then a return to use in the 2000s, and then declining to its current level, which is between 8 and 9%. And then overall, we're at that 15% roughly. So past month use, about 40% of people abstained, about 60% used something in the past month. Of those, you've got about 2 million people that tried cocaine, or used cocaine rather, in the last month, about 1.2 million that used methamphetamine, and in between that, 1.6 million people that used a prescription stimulant in the last month. And then this is for 2021. That's the most recent time they gave this graph of abstainers at 40%. But the more recent numbers are 1.8 million, 1.1 million, and an increase in methamphetamine users in the last month to 1.6. So this is looking at the time trends for the various types of stimulants. So cocaine down here, methamphetamine here, 1.2 or so, this is 0.6 rather, and 0.7% of the population. And they recently introduced this new category, which is using a central nervous system stimulant of any type, whether it's a prescription stimulant, methamphetamine, crack, or cocaine. And that one is right here at 1.5% of the population. So clearly, people that are using one of these are not necessarily using all of the others. So you've got roughly a population of users that's about 3 times the size of these 3 things. So most likely you've got users of methamphetamine that aren't using cocaine, and users of prescription stimulants that aren't using any illegal drugs. And also users of crack maybe not using cocaine and just stick with crack, I don't know. But anyway, it doesn't delineate that information. It just helps to tell you that a lot of these are users of just one of these types of stimulants. When you add it all together, you get 1.5% of the population, but none of them are much over 0.5. And then this is past year use instead of past month. In the past year, you had roughly 22% of the population using something illegal, that is, including marijuana, of course, which is the vast majority of it. But you have cocaine users past year, prescription stimulant, and then methamphetamine. So 4.8 million, 3.7, and 2.5 million in the last year. And then for whatever reason, most of the other statistics are developed for last year users. So like this one is looking at that central nervous system stimulant misuse category and helping us to understand that the cocaine users here are in this blue circle, prescription stimulant users are here in this yellow circle, and methamphetamine users are here in the red circle. People that use all 3 are in this small dark blue triangle, and then people that use two, whether it's cocaine and prescription stimulants or cocaine and methamphetamine or meth and prescription stimulants, are these small numbers compared to the overall. So that helps to delineate why you have a fairly large category when you look at all prescriptions or all stimulant use rather, because there's an awful lot of people that use prescription stimulants that don't use cocaine or meth. There's a lot of people that use methamphetamine that don't use either cocaine or prescription stimulants and so on. So then looking at trends for past year stimulant use or misuse, cocaine, once again, past year, a lot of users. By 1991, it was down to 2% of the population. It's remained relatively stable at that level since. For prescription stimulants, it was fairly high back in the 80s, came down by the early 90s, and then has been trending up until recently, almost to 2% before the recent drop, supposedly during the pandemic. And then for methamphetamine users, they didn't start looking at that until more recently, and the number has been varying a little bit, but pretty stably and slowly increasing to its current level, which is about 0.9%. The number of people using crack in the past year has been steadily declining until the pandemic, of course. So then looking at all of these categories together for just cocaine, you've got the initiates down here, people that used it in the last month, people that used it in the last year, and then people that have ever used it in their lifetime. You can see the number of people that have ever used it in their lifetime has varied quite a bit, but it's steadily increased from about 8% of the population to almost 15% of the population. But the number of people that have actually been using it in the last month has declined, going from almost 3% down to around 0.7 or 0.8%. So what this tells me is that the people who try cocaine generally just try it. They don't establish a habit where they're using it every year or every month. The vast majority of them try it and decide that's not for them. Maybe it's because it's illegal, maybe it's because it's just something that doesn't do anything for them and leave that party scene pretty quick. If you add methamphetamine, you can see that proportional to cocaine, the number of people that are using that went up quite a bit during the 2000s and then has kind of sagged in the middle and then come back up to about 6% of the population now that has ever tried it. The number of people, as you can see, is pretty small for past year, past month, and initiates, all down below 1%. So once again, most likely a drug that most people try and then stop using. And if you throw prescription stimulants in there, once again, pretty busy graph, but the number of people that have ever tried it in their lifetime has been declining since a peak in about 2001, and it's currently about 9%. So roughly half the number of people that have used cocaine in their lifetime, and the number of past year users has been declining, but from 2%. So almost the same number of people use a prescription stimulant in the last year as have used cocaine in the last year. And then the number of people that are hardcore users, like in the past month, pretty small. And the number of initiates also small, under 1%. And then this is just to show that the whole of crack is fairly small, as in the number of lifetime crack users is here. And then this is the number of people that have used a CNS, central nervous system stimulant in the past year, in terms of percent of the population. So all of the other past year numbers are down here. And then for those that are more technically fluent, this is on a log scale just to be able to show you the detail in these smaller numbers, but we won't get into that. Okay, for past year cocaine users in terms of the age distribution, majority of them are in the 18 to 25-year-old group, and the numbers have been declining for cocaine. And this is looking at more long-term trend on the age distribution, and that decline is right there. So overall, it's been pretty steady at about 3% of the 18 to 25 age group, and the overall numbers have been slowly increasing. For methamphetamine, you have, once again, most of the users in the 18 to 25-year-old group, but you also have a lot of users in the 26 and older group. And while the number of users is sharply declining in the last 5 years, because we don't have the 2021 data in this graph, the number of users in the 26 and older group is rapidly increasing. To me, this would most likely mean that you've got a aging effect. People in this group are moving into this group and continuing to use methamphetamine. You do have a slight increase as well in the total number of users. And this is looking at the past year methamphetamine users over the period of 2015 to 2020. So that's that slight increase in overall use from 0.6 to 0.9. And then prescription stimulant misuse, once again, 18 to 25-year-old group primary and declining. And then this is a longer time period graph for that same trend, which is down here and more stable back here, moving from about 7.5% of the population down to about 5%. So let's look at past year substance use disorders, methamphetamine, prescription stimulants, and cocaine. So in terms of the number of people who are trying to get treatment or have gotten treatment, well, actually this is more in terms of who meets criteria for a substance use disorder. Even though there are a lot more users of cocaine and prescription stimulants, according to their survey anyway, the number of people that are using methamphetamine more closely match with the criteria for a substance use disorder. But the numbers for all three are very close. And then this is looking at the distribution of who has a severe substance use versus a moderate substance use disorder versus a mild. For alcohol, you've got about 20% that have a severe. For marijuana, about 16%. For cocaine, it's about 40%. And for methamphetamine, it's almost 60%. So generally, if you're willing to try methamphetamine, you're pretty desperate for something to use, and you're hardcore. And then in terms of the age distribution for who has a cocaine use disorder, mostly it's the 18 to 25-year-olds. And the numbers, fortunately, they went up a little bit, but they've come down and now are pretty stable at about, 0.7%. And overall, the numbers have been pretty stable for the last 10 years at about 0.4%. And who has a methamphetamine use disorder? Well, that's kind of a three-way tie, but generally it's 18 to 25-year-olds and 26 and older age category. So these people, once they develop a substance use disorder, generally keep it, it looks like. So from monitoring the future, once again, looking at 8th, 10th, and 12th graders for the student or high school student and middle school students, the drugs that we're looking at would be categorized in the illicit drugs portion. So overall, a relatively small proportion compared to cigarettes, marijuana, and alcohol. And the numbers for cocaine have been steadily declining. So it's at about 2% of the combined student population. And the numbers for crack have been steadily declining since the late 90s, and they're at less than 1%. And then this is looking at the whether it's 8th, 10th, or 12th graders, and clearly the late 70s through the early 90s was a period of wide use of cocaine by high school seniors. Up to about 12, maybe 13% of high school seniors had tried it. Possibly, fortunately, we don't have those numbers for crack, but the trends are down in all grades, which is good in my opinion anyway, down to about 1% or less for cocaine and less than 1% for crack. And since the late 90s, the trend has been down in all grades for crack. And then this is looking at those prescription stimulants like amphetamines, specifically looking at Adderall, Ritalin, and then methamphetamine for combined grades, showing that amphetamine, of course, is the most widely misused. Fortunately, even though it has had some hiccups, the trend for this one is down since the late 90s, and it's about 6% of the combined student population, maybe 5%, that have tried an amphetamine. Adderall, maybe 4%, Ritalin at about 1%, and methamphetamine at less than 1%. And then this is looking at the more historical trend anyway amongst seniors. And clearly when cocaine was popular with seniors, so were amphetamines. Fortunately, that died out fairly quickly. And since then, there's been kind of a slow decline in the number of people using. And the same for methamphetamine or crystal meth. The numbers are down. Like for methamphetamine, it was like less than 0.5%, and for crystal meth at about 0.5% for seniors. In terms of the geography of where do people use cocaine, this is from 2008 to 10. California, some Arizona, and then New York is a big one, and some of the New England states, and DC, of course, being a hotbed of cocaine and crack use, and then apparently Rhode Island. And then for meth abuse, unfortunately, I didn't have any more recent data, but the data is that majority of it's in the West. And this is looking at the correlation between methamphetamine use and other things. So if you use methamphetamine, how often do you inject methamphetamine? This is 1 to 29 days of use, more than 200 days. So that's a large percent, almost a quarter of people in the group of people that use methamphetamine injected it on more than 200 days out of the year. And how many qualified for a use disorder? About 55%. And then how many of them used another substance, and which one? Well, almost 70% of them used cannabis. Got a lot of, nearly 50% using, well, about 45% using nicotine. Habitually, they're dependent. A lot of binge drinkers. People using prescription opioids about 40% of the time. And then having some type of mental health issue, like a serious mental illness about a quarter of the time. And any mental illness, almost 60% of the time. So I guess you could say that's what I mean by people that seriously need help. They're hardcore. These people are using almost every day. We've got a quarter of them injecting the drug, and a quarter of them having a serious mental illness, and almost 60% of them being co-occurring. And of course, we already know that there's an overdose epidemic. And how many of those deaths have we been experiencing? Well, this is a lot, obviously. as of 2021, almost 107,000. And a lot of those are guys. About a third of them are females. How many of them are involving cocaine? Quite a few. How many are using some type of psychostimulant? Primarily methamphetamine. A lot. And there's a number of other drugs involved as well, but these two stimulants account for a good, it looks like about half of the people were using some type of stimulant when they passed. And so these are the stimulant involved. Overdose deaths using any stimulant is that number, 53,000. Stimulant with an opioid is here in yellow, and then a stimulant without any opioid is here in the light blue. So of the people that were using a stimulant and overdosed, which is about 53,000 people in 2021, about 2/3 of them were also using an opioid. And this is all the cocaine ones, almost 25,000. And it looks like more like 4/5 of them were using an opioid when they overdosed. And then this is psychostimulants, including methamphetamine. And there were 32,000 of those. And of those, roughly a little over half were using an opioid at the same time. And these graphs are just reiterating the same thing, only less clear in my opinion. So then where are people dying of methamphetamine as of 2016 anyway? Southwest primarily. That's where people are overdosing. And for some reason, at least in that year, Nevada by far was the primary place where people were overdosing on meth. And this is old because it's from 2017, but it just shows that basically west of the Mississippi is mostly fentanyl overdoses, and I mean east of the Mississippi, and west of it is mostly methamphetamine overdoses. And as I discussed in the video briefly, LA County has been experiencing, and I don't have the most recent numbers, but a huge increase, 7 times more meth-related deaths over this period, and 5 times more drug-related overdoses over this period of 2008 to 2017.